So welcome. We're going to talk about leadership. I'm so delighted that each and every one of you are here. Would you mind taking a moment? And would you, in about 10 seconds, unmute all together? And would you say your hellos, your good afternoons, your well wishes, whatever you want to say to this incredible group of folks who cares just like you do about learning about leadership. Everybody ready? 3, 2, 1, hit it.
Hello.
Hello, everybody.
Nice to meet you all.
There we go. Love it. I'm going to share my screen and we're going to get ourselves started. But I would love to ask you to think about why you decided to sign up. I'm really curious about why you decided to sign up. Would you all mind putting that into the chat? And I'm going to ask somebody. I think I'm going to ask Roxanne. Roxanne, I want to ask you why you signed up. And before you answer, right here, we're talking about the 7 key takeaways from the pandemic on managing and motivating. Everyone's writing into the chat. Roxanne, tell us, why did you sign up? Oh, I can't hear you. I hear that you've got Bluetooth headphones and you're trying to figure it out. Yeah.
1 second.
I hear you.
Okay, you can hear me now.
Yes.
Okay, perfect. For me, when I saw this title come across, I thought it was good to see what other perspectives are on the takeaways. The last 2 years has been challenging in leadership. And I think we may have all experienced whether it was furloughing or reduction of force of staff to try to adjust to an environment where we weren't delivering services.
Yes.
And so I've managed through the Great Recession.
Yes.
I've managed through, post 9/11 impact on the airline industry or the aviation industry. But I think the pandemic brought different challenges, not only to city organizations to deliver services, but more importantly, the emotional and mental impact that it took on our employees. And that was a different challenge as a leader, especially that it was impacting everyone. It's different when you're dealing with maybe 1 or 2 employees that are having some of those that I call life moments.
Yes.
Those life moments happen to the entire workforce.
Yes.
And yourself.
Yes.
As well. So
beautifully said, Roxanne. Who can relate? If your hands aren't up, you're probably on the wrong call. So, Roxanne, that was wonderful. Thank you so much. I'm going to ask everybody to take notes, 2 sets of notes, probably. One side that's notes that you want to remember stuff, right? Like you normally take notes, but another set of notes that's more powerful and that's more important, that are your inspired actions. Meaning once we hang up today, so then what? We spend too much of our lives just kind of being passive and like, okay, I'll take this information in. That's not what you're here to do. I know that you want to gain some actions. And I'm seeing a bunch of people's comments, right? Judy says, since the pandemic, I believe everything has changed for the workforce and how we deal with employees, et cetera. Melissa says people are burnt out and lots of turnover. I want to be able to support folks in this transition time. Awesome. Gary, to learn each other's, to learn the barriers and the challenges. And then lots of wonderful comments. Please keep them coming. Oh, I love that you are all here. So I'm going to share my screen off and on because I like to be able to see all of you better, but I know that it's helpful to have a visual. So starting us off, I want to show you this slide. This says the shift, right? So I want to ask you, and I'm going to mute anybody who might not be muted right now because we get a funny little like a reverb thing. Oh, great. And we've got 3 more people coming in. Okay. I want to ask you, show of hands, and we can just see a few people when we're in this view. Who remembers VCRs? If you don't, how sweet, how precious. Great, VCRs. Okay, so then we know we transitioned away from VCRs to DVDs, right? I think we all are like, yep, I remember DVDs. And then, I don't know about any of you, DVDs, and then my CD collection. I still have it. I'm like, what do I do with these things? I don't know, but they're worth thousands of dollars, and now they're just sitting there. Then we transitioned to streaming services, right? If you're going to watch a movie, apparently only 7% of the global home entertainment market is DVDs these days, the physical DVDs. 70% of the industry is streaming. And I share that with you because it's really related to what we're talking about here today. You see this, it says, when their industry shifts, the vast majority of businesses fail. I'm not going to ask you to raise your hands to tell me who feels like they're failing right now, but I am going to guess the vast majority feels like what some of these clients have said to me. They have said things like, what can we do when we're tired of smiling? Have you heard that kind of thing before? I've heard other people say, and these are notes that I took while talking to clients, we've forgotten how to be an effective team. So when we look at the shift that COVID has caused, it's absolutely something else that's needed. Just to look back a little bit with history and some industries, because we're going to be talking about a bunch of different industries, organizations that can kind of give us the roadmap to what we can do now. Kodak had to adapt from paper photos to digital. You remember those paper photos? Some of you have photo albums. Nokia failed to adapt to from flip phones to smartphones. AOL failed to adapt from dial-up to broadband. Blockbuster declared bankruptcy in 2010. Look at that's a long time ago now, right? So there's a shift that is happening now. I'm going to ask for you to put into the chat, what issues are you having now? What challenges are you having now? And while you are all putting those into the chat, Barb, would you mind unmuting with me and telling me what challenges are you seeing now that are probably somehow related to the times?
Well, hi, everybody. I'm Barb Frakes. I'm from NACA. Let me first say that. One of the challenges that we have is when people are in on Zoom, working from home or the office, they take their camera off and all you see is their profile picture or their name. So it feels like maybe they're really not in the meeting, but yet they claim they are, but it's hard to have interaction when you're looking at a picture of somebody.
Beautiful, beautiful. And Barb, what I'm going to even say is that that's bigger picture. That's about connection, right? It is. When we only see someone's picture, or even not that, right? It's just a black screen. We know it's permission for multitasking. Like, anybody challenge me on that and tell me that's not the case. But that's what it is. And so we're saying, how can we be present? How can we be engaged, even in this remote environment where there's a lot of permission for lack of connection? Thank you for that, Barb. And while you were sharing that, look at all these comments that are coming in. We've got hiring, retention, long distance, modern technology, having vision, motivating staff, being accountable. Oh gosh, all the things, recruiting. And then they keep coming. Oh yeah, burnout. I'm just scrolling through some of them. So we know that we've got a bunch of challenges we're facing right now. Here are some that some of you said, right? People who are quitting. We've got getting staffed up, which can be challenging, right? Because there's this great resignation right now. There's less civility, some groups are saying, meaning more people are at their wits' end and having not being as kind or understanding. That there's elevated burnout and stress across your organization. If you're like, yes, 1, 2, 3, and 4, that's us. Will you give us a hand? Right? If you can see these things, it means you're paying attention. You've got self-awareness. That's the good first step. But now it's like, so now what? I just added this up. Have I said who I am, by the way? My name is Julie Lancaster. Nice to meet you all. This is part of Lancaster Leadership. We're based in Flagstaff, Arizona. We serve teams throughout the country. And I'm so glad that you're here. Over the pandemic, I just added this up, since April 2020 through now. So that's 25 months, right? If I'm doing the math right. I just added up how many teams have we served? And the answer is we've served 32 organizations and 66 unique teams. So we've had the real opportunity, both myself and the other facilitators, to see what your problems are, what you all are facing, what the challenges are, and how we can start to move to the other side. So I'm going to share some of those examples, as well as what the research is saying out there. So the question that I want to ask you, and you're putting on your action plan, your homework, if this makes sense for you, is, are you talking about all of these things in your organization? That's the first question. If not, start talking about them. Don't just try to be figuring them out with the executive team, or you behind closed doors, or not having conversation, just thinking about them. Talk about these issues. Secondly, are you doing research? We know the beautiful world of the internet, as we were talking about the technology journey, right? You can, in a moment, have access to articles, learn what other organizations are doing. Have you spent a little bit of time figuring out, how do I deal with this stuff? And thirdly, have you created a strategic plan? Not just a few thoughts, a few activities, a few ideas. What is our strategic plan in our organization to get our team from burnout to resilience? Just as an example. And so those are a few places that you can start. I'm going to jump in and start showing you the strategies. So the first one, I might say this is the most important one, but all 7 are important. I just want to hit the ground running. The first one, the new face of accountability is, drum roll please, it is autonomy and decision making. So I want to share what I mean by this. And actually, I'm going to give you this, and then I'm going to take it off the screen share. It says, how can you, in your role, in your organization, give autonomy times 10? Meaning you're already giving some autonomy and decision-making opportunity to people amongst the ranks, right? How can you do it times 10? What we've started doing in the last 2 years is we have more people who work from home, right? Who is working from home right in this moment? Even though you have this beautiful virtual background, great, wonderful. Oh my gosh, so incredible to see so many of you. Hi, Stephanie. So that has been an opportunity for us to give autonomy. Some of us have been like, are they really working? Are they taking out their laundry? Are they driving their kids to carpool, whatever? But what we're learning is that people are being more responsible, perhaps too responsible, because they are working in the same place that they are also living. Here are a few thoughts. First, I want to share with you, if you have any question, comment, anything that you want to pipe in about, go ahead and put up one of the emoji hands. It's the reaction button. And then you put up an emoji hand. Also, because you're all curious as to who all of you are, and oh my gosh, it's been too long. I know probably 80% of you. If you're interested in knowing who each other are, feel free to make sure your name says who you are, and put your organization too, if you're curious to share that and learn from each other. So a few things. Autonomy and decision making. A community college president that I was working with, he said, this is what prompted me to have this as the topic today. He said, I'm not able to motivate and hold people accountable like I used to. What happened? And so let's take a look at how we are giving autonomy and giving people the ability to make decisions. Netflix. Netflix is an organization we probably all are familiar with. Yes, some of us are too familiar with, right? They have a travel and expense policy. Looking around at the organizations who are here, I know you are all incredible individuals, but I know your organizations, I would say we probably have a good 80% that are somehow connected to the government. So these are all relatable, whether you're private industry or something else, but Netflix has a travel and expense policy. And you know what it is? It's not like, here's the amount of money. Oh, Barb, you're especially interested. Our financial folks are like, tell me. It is that you need to make decisions based in Netflix best interest. That's the travel and expense policy. Or you're like, no, but how much money are you allowed to spend? At first they had, you can rent a car or you can rent a taxi, but not both. That was their policy at first. And then they moved to, spend Netflix's money the same way that you would spend your own money. And then they were like, no, that's not exactly working. Some people are way too spendy. Some people are way too frugal. And then they went to act in Netflix's best interest. So I'm sharing that with you to hopefully have your mind blown to be like, oh, that is a very different way of doing decision-making and autonomy. Also, within the Netflix culture, they have this F and R way of being. They call it freedom and responsibility. They say, let's treat people like grown-ups, assume you have amazing judgment. And if you don't show that you have amazing judgment, we'll give you a healthy severance package and show you the door. And so I don't know about you, but when I hear these kinds of things, I get a little bit anxious because I feel like, no, but what's the clarity? What's right judgment and what's wrong judgment? Anyone else thinking that same thing? Like there is too much gray. So that is something that I want us to each start thinking about is how can we have some big picture objective? Like, I want you to make good judgment, but it's couched within something that's big and high level. A couple of other examples with this, if we're looking at other businesses, there's a business called Simplest Technologies. They deal in software. And somebody who works there has said, beyond competitive pay, autonomy is the highest perk. Would any of you also say autonomy is one of the highest perks in your organization? Just curious, show of hands. Maritza, will you tell us how is autonomy, how does it show up? And thank you for letting me just put you on the spot like that while you're having lunch too.
Sorry. So I work in a team. I can't speak for my whole organization, but I work in a team where we're lucky enough to have deliverable-based work plans. So each person has kind of their own scope and they have to get it done within the year. And, you know, we do have a lot of meetings and things, but we're able to provide a pretty flexible work environment as far as hours and where people work from, you know, and it's not everyone in the organization is able to provide that. It's just the nature of the work that we're doing in my department. But
sure. And is it working? Do people appreciate that?
Yeah, when I've asked people what they like about this department, the number one thing they always say is flexibility and autonomy. And we don't pay as much as we probably should, but that's what keeps people in this team. And I think we have a pretty low turnover rate.
Beautiful, thank you. And I know that for some of us, myself included, that I want to tighten up the reins whenever it feels like I'm losing control. I want to have tighter control and tell people what to do. Anyone in my same club? Just humor me. Thank you. Right? But what this is saying is the opposite. There's also a book called Influencer. I don't know if anyone's read it. It's by the same folks who have written Crucial Conversations, which lots of folks know. And in that book, they share the research that you can find in a few different places of where there was a hospital and they gave the patients the freedom to administer their own pain medication. So then the question was, did they use more or did they use less? And the amazing thing is that across the board, they used less. When we release the controls, even if it might be our tendency to tighten them up, we give people the opportunity to make decisions. They're often acting very responsibly. Have any of you heard of this unlimited paid time off kind of thing that's happening these days? Will you put the name of any companies that you know, maybe even your own, into the chat? So curious to see. And don't everybody go and quit and start working for those companies, right? Put them into the chat, the organizations that you know. Netflix is one of these. Awesome. We've got Basecamp coming in here. Also Kiva, which deals with small business loans, is another company that does that. Great. My previous company, KCI, excellent. They bought 3M. Great. Steinberger Construction. Great. Keep them coming. Keep them coming. What they are finding is that people are very responsible and not just taking off 360 days a year. And there's another opportunity for how we can give this kind of freedom. Andy Technologies is another company. They do rapid DNA testing. There was a 2017 Glassdoor study where they found that people in America, in the United States, only take 54% of their allotted vacation days. Isn't that part even interesting, right? Even when we're given, here you have this many days per year, people aren't taking them, for better or worse. We could have a big conversation about that. But now here's this new philosophy to say, take it when you need it, within reason. I'm curious, how is this kind of concept relevant to today's environment? Meaning the idea of having unlimited paid time off. How's that relevant to you? Is there anything in your organization where you're like, oh, I wonder if we could loosen the reins in this kind of way, or we already have loosened the reins in another kind of way? Has anybody got anything that you're like, oh, there's something that we're doing that's equivalent to this unlimited paid time off? Just give us a little emoji hand if you can think of something. I just want to bring you in if you are, if you've got something to share with us. Great, Chuck, tell us.
While we don't have unlimited paid time off, we do have the opportunity for people to flex, so they can work a 4-day week if they choose to work 4 9.5-hour days. And so we have a lot of people who will flex off a Friday or flex off a Monday, which has been interesting. And again, there are pros and cons from department managers saying it leaves us short. But again, with what we've learned over the last 2 years, you really want to take care of your employees and provide them a valuable, credible place to work, and then they kind of give it back to you. So, and we start with 3 weeks vacation, and people who've been here 20 years get 6 weeks. So, we have a lot of paid time off. So
yeah, wonderful. Thank you for that. And also what I'm hearing is that each one of you should figure out when you're going to take your next vacation. Honestly, right? We know if you want to have resilience, you got to take breaks. A few other things. Sir Richard Branson, he's that British billionaire with the lovely hair, right? He says that how can we as leaders use the ABCD method, standing for always be connecting the dots. Kind of crafty, right? But the idea is, if you are saying we're having an issue with unmotivated staff, for example, let me stop and reflect. Let me schedule time on my calendar where I'm taking time to pay attention, to pause and strategize. What's going on? Why are folks unmotivated? Which ones are motivated? I wonder why that's happening. Really to take a deep look at current state. What's happening? Steve Jobs, when he was given his Stanford speech, said something similar, which is he talked about how we can only connect the dots looking backward, not forward. So we all have the beauty of history, right? The last couple of years, what's working, what's not? Where are the dots then that we can start to connect? So this is, how can we give more autonomy? How can we give more freedom? How can we give people more opportunity for decision making? Now I want to go to the next one. So this next one says managing to objectives. So you know this. The days of measuring productivity by hours put in and butts in seats are gone, or the derriere in the chair, they're gone. Years ago, I think about 25, that makes me feel old, 25 years ago or so, I was the outdoor education director at this organization in Southern California, and I loved my job so very much. And I had brought a friend out from college. I was the outdoor education director. I brought him out. I didn't bring him out. I didn't hire him, but I told him about the summer camp director job. He became the director of the summer camp. And then the executive director position became open. And they went right to my friend that I had brought in. I was resentful, I was angry, I was frustrated. And when I asked, like, why'd you choose him? Right? Because I thought I was the bee's knees. I thought I would be a great candidate. And they said, well, it seems like he's more dedicated and committed. And I was like, okay, that's good feedback. What do you mean? They said, he's here more. And I am delighted now that, however, 25 or so years later, we have now caught up to the philosophy that it's not about the number of hours that our butts are in the seat, but it's about how effective we are. It's about how productive, it's about how well we use that time. Who here is remote at least part-time? Let me just give us a hand. Oh, interesting. Okay, great. So that is one concept that we're talking about, is the location. I know also about 15 years ago, I had a friend who lived in Flagstaff, and she said, well, our jobs have now said we're going completely remote so we can live wherever we want. So they moved to Juneau, Alaska. And I remember thinking, like, that's so otherworldly. Now it's not otherworldly. That company called Andy Technologies that I mentioned before, they are worldwide and they all work from home. So part of it is location that we're talking about, but really what we're getting at here is how clear are you about the objectives, meaning the work that needs to get done. It's not you're sitting in your chair from this time to this time. That's how we're going to know you're productive or effective. But it's actually about, this is the work that needs to get done. Make it happen. It's about big picture. It's about here's our vision. Here are our initiatives. Can you work toward that? Now, I want to share, if you're like, my boss needs to hear some of this, please feel free to take anything that you're learning today or that we're talking about today and go back to your organization and say, this is what I learned today. What do you think? Can we have more autonomy? What do you think? Can we be more focused on objectives than hours put in? In regards to getting communication time, FaceTime, which these days is often virtual. If you're not having at least 2 one-on-ones per month with the people who you're needing to communicate with about these objectives, you're probably not having enough communication. Another thing I want to share is in terms of the virtual world. I was just doing work over the last year with 2 different organizations. One was a school and another was a community development group. And both of them were working on creating a vision, right? We were working on, like, what's the vision? We were getting clear on what the big picture objectives are. What do we want to stand for around here? And if you're like, well, what's the difference between mission or vision, or which one was it? It was specifically about vision, which is us talking about aspirational in the future. What's this really big kind of an objective that we want to work toward? And they got clear, and then all the decisions, all the initiatives underneath that align with a vision. So if you're in an organization or a team, more specifically your team, that doesn't have clear vision, make that be one of your objectives, because how can you know if the decisions are right? How can you know if there's good judgment if there's not something overarching? The other thing that might be kind of provocative is both of those groups, one had like 60 people, one had like 70 people. Both of those groups afterwards said it was a superior experience doing it remotely compared to in person. And I share that with you because most people that I know these days are like, if we have our preference, let's be in person, right? But both of them were because of the flexibility of location, about the speed of which we could process, about the contribution of all the individuals. It was a superior kind of thing. So if you've been having the mindset of, if only we could be in person, this would be better, I wonder if it's possible for you to start shifting that a little bit. Okay, I'm going to keep going a little bit more. No, we've just got an hour and 15 minutes today. It's so short. I want to be with you all day. I would like for us to think about the whole crisis that we've been experiencing. And I don't mean to say that lightly. I've been working with organizations who their staff have died. Been working with organizations where their clients have died. On top of all the other things, I mean, overworking, understaffed, morale, but really big kind of crisis issues. And I want each of us to be thinking about what we have learned, meaning that all of you probably are experts now, right? In how to deal with surviving a crisis. And if you're like, no, I don't know, like, what are the tools? What are the next time something like this would happen? Like, what do we do? I want you to really listen up. So what I have observed over the last 25 months is that teams have either broken or they've bonded. And I could ask you right now which one you fall into, and I bet you could be clear. Some teams are like, we are tighter than we have ever been. We depend on each other. We are so connected. And others are saying things like, we used to be an effective team. And so there are a few things that I want us to really remember, things that we have learned. We want to recognize how people process information in a crisis, first of all. Are you so curious? So the first is that they simplify. People simplify. They are unable to juggle multiple facts. So if you are trying to work with your teams and giving a lot of complex information, that's just too much. I don't know if we consider ourselves still in a crisis or not. Your organization might be feeling it differently from another, but that's one thing that they simplify. Secondly, they hold tight to current beliefs. They don't seek out evidence to the contrary. We've heard of confirmation bias before, yes, which is I'm going to just look for the information or the evidence that aligns with what I already believe. Really helpful and good for us to know. Then we've got this third part. People remember what they see and believe, what they've experienced, meaning that they want their messages to be confirmed before taking action. I know I've worked with some organizations that have had to respond and pivot, right? That's the word of COVID. And there's a lot of stress then amongst the ranks because people are saying, you're telling us what to do, then we do it. And it's not tried and true. We don't, there's so much change. We don't stick to what we agreed upon, and that can feel like a trust breaker for teams. Then we've got the fourth, which is the first message is believed. Isn't that interesting? So what we've got with that is be careful. Be careful, not careful like too cautious, but be thoughtful in your messaging and how you are communicating and what you're communicating. In the absence of credible sources, also people will speculate. You know that. If you've ever had to, in quotes, let somebody go and you don't give your team any information about what happened, people guess, right? People are like, oh, this is what happened. That is what must have happened. I wonder if my job's secure. So with this, we also want to talk about how do we deal, right? Here are 3 strategies that you can move toward healing with if your group currently needs some healing. Before I share with you what these strategies are, I was just working with a group recently. I'm looking around to see if there's anyone here from the group, where we went to Wolf Lodge in Phoenix in Arizona. And this group hadn't been together in person for 2 years. So they were delighted to be in the presence of one another in human form, right? Like they were just so excited. And what we wanted to do is process the grief and move forward. And if you have the old school mentality of we don't talk about feelings at work, please change. You are underutilizing something that is absolutely important. Talk about feelings at work. Don't ignore any elephants in the room. And so what we did with this group, because they wanted to process their grief and then be able to move forward, is we focused on 2 questions. And you might say, oh, I want to go back and ask these exact questions to my team. One is, what feelings have you been having over the last 2 years? Describe why for each of the feelings. Because we know over the last 2 years, people have had many, many different feelings. So how can we be focused on feelings and let people share? Whether it's been the best time of their lives, they have the opportunity to share through feelings, because we can't convince, our job is not to tell somebody their feelings are wrong, right? Feelings are just feelings. Or they might have had the most traumatic and dramatic time of their lives. To give people the opportunity to share and then to ask them to describe why they had those feelings. The second question was, can you name a few of the most impactful events on you over the last 2 years? And then people share their stories. And if you want to develop empathy amongst your colleagues, amongst your team, ask people to share those. That's how we then move toward healing. We just opened up the floor, put people into pods of about 8 people, gave them a half an hour to talk. And people said over a 2-day event, that was the most powerful, the most important time. So we've got 3 things here. First, in terms of moving toward healing, we want to practice gratitude. This is not getting all Pollyanna and ignoring the hardships, but we want to say, after somebody has survived COVID, for example, to say, I just want to tell you, I am so glad that you made it through. How can we remember to practice gratitude, even if 97% of what we're dealing with is the worst, right? How can we focus some on that 3% and authentically? The second is, can we reflect, right? We call it here reflection rounds, but how can we reflect? How can we think back? Not try and do push it down, push it down, push it down, move forward. Because if we do that, it can stick with us for decades if we're not actually processing. And then the third we've got here is, can we externalize the stress? We all know that dealing with our stress is important. If not, it can kill us, right? Does that mean journaling? Does that mean exercising? Does that mean talking? But for each person to come up with a strategy of how they're going to externalize the stress, because they can't just wish it away. With that, I want to get to the next one, and then I want to ask for you all to chime in. So this next one, no, first I've got a quote for you, which is, I'm going to read it. Ready? Once people have had a chance to share their raw emotional experience and check in with one another on their circumstances and losses, the ability to then tap into the generosity, wisdom, and strength of their team as a whole can help provide vision and resources to manage and perhaps ease or temper people's sense of risk and uncertainty. That's important. That's powerful, right? Once people have had a chance to share their raw emotional experience and check in, then we can get to generosity, wisdom, and strength. So again, none of this, let's just move on, bottle it up. Let's not deal. Let's not talk about emotions. Okay. Then here we go. This is what I was wanting to get to. In terms of diversity and inclusion, it is no longer avoidable. The conversation, meaning that this needs to be something that we're talking about, that we're thinking about. One of my colleagues, Ivy Banks, who she works for Xavier University, and she does some work with me when we're working together with groups on diversity and inclusion. She says we are going to discuss the undiscussables. Diversity and inclusion can feel like a scary topic because we are nice people, we are good people, we want to do the right thing, right? And sometimes we feel so debilitated by our politeness that we don't say anything. Have you seen that? Just yesterday, I was working with an organization at a community college where it was with a new initiative, a grant-funded program called Strengthening Indigenous Student Success. I asked, can we call it CIS? Do you call it CIS? Like, that's short, that's easier for me. And they said yes. But anyway, I bring that up because the idea was for us to actually talk about the things that often people are too afraid to talk about. So both myself and my colleague, whose name is Rose, who's Navajo, we facilitated it together. And I got to ask her questions the whole way through and model what question asking can look like, right? It's okay to be curious and ask questions. As I was saying, Rose, can you start with the introduction? And ahead of time, as she was saying, she said, sure, I'm going to ask each person to go around and share their clan. And I said, Rose, since I'm clanless, what's the best way for me to introduce myself? And she said, no, you're not clanless. First, you have your matrilineal lineage, you have your patrilineal lineage, and you could say something about each of those. And I said, okay, great. It wouldn't seem like inauthentic if I was doing that. She said, no, it would actually seem really embracing and great. How can we ask each other questions? I'm really curious. Have any of you been doing this well? Diversity and inclusion stuff over the last 2 years? I see one no, I see one little yes. I'd love for someone to come in and share with us what you're doing that's working. And in case you're like, I want to be up on what all the acronyms are, DEI is a common thing people are saying, diversity, equity, and inclusion. Sometimes diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging, sometimes JEDI, justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion. Okay, there we go. Thank you. Will someone share with us, who's been doing it somewhat well? Your organization has been talking about it. You've been having a plan around it. You've been tackling this. Barb is one. Anybody else? And now I'm extra curious. Roxanne, you too? The rest of you are like, no, help us. Yes?
So I can share from what we've done at the City of Phoenix.
Great.
It's a large organization, and I'm just gonna say the good, the bad, and the ugly of this process.
Thanks.
When they rolled it out, they brought in an outside consultant to start with our leadership team. So anyone that was in middle management to executive above, we went to an all-day training session. I will tell you, it was very uncomfortable for many people in there. Some of the things of, some supervisors were saying we were, touching the feely touchy, and that's not why they came to work. So the conversations did make people uncomfortable, which is still somewhat of a good thing, because, through pain, you get growth for it. And so from there, it then kind of cascaded down. We're required now for every employee to take at least 2 DEI classes in that period of time. So that's kind of like their measurement of it getting out there. But I don't think that was the best approach. Will we have a record that people took the class? Yes. Would we see the result, trickle down into how we work? I guess I'm a little pessimistic about that for it. So I'd be curious of how other organizations are doing it. It seemed like we took a class, then we took some more classes, but it's still hard for me and very difficult now with the pandemic, since we're all a little bit working from home still. We're still not at 100% of the workforce back to know if that's actually making a change.
Yeah. Great awareness, right? Roxanne's like, we're making efforts, some's working, some's not. Help us, what are other organizations doing? And there is this kind of philosophy of, can we get comfortable with being uncomfortable? In the rooms that I've been part of that are having these conversations, every time there's some of that, Roxanne, right? The people being like, this is not what I come to work for. I'm not here to talk about feelings. We are all just fine around here. And so it's hard, right? These are important conversations for us to be having. It's important for us to create a safe space where we can be discussing these. One of the first things that any of us will hear in a training or a workshop that's like this, is that it's not helpful for us to say we don't see color, just as an example, because when we do that, we are dismissing part of people's identities. And so anybody else, you've done this well or seen it done well? It's radio silence, isn't it? Okay, so your homework is to figure out a plan. Your homework is to talk to your organization about how can we do this better? How can we focus on this? One place that you may start creating a strategic plan is around your hiring practices. With the Great Resignation, there's a real opportunity. That's sun shining something, right? There's a real opportunity to be considering diversity and inclusion in our hiring practices. There was a law firm that I was working with that said, we don't want to be an organization full of old white men, but that's who applies. And I thought, how incredible of you to lay it out there, discussing the elephant in the room. And so then they needed to get creative as to where they were recruiting from, to learn what are other places we can be recruiting to encourage more of this. Okay, so let's keep going. So now we get to the power of connection. And this, there are two parts. There are two different parts. There's power of connection in one-on-ones, and then also amongst your team. So who here would say that connection is one of your top values? I can only see 5 of you right now. So, oh yeah, so 3 of the 5. Okay, wonderful. So whoever just raised their hand, if it wasn't you, go and ask them to mentor you later. Right? If you're like, we're just here to get our work done, right? Go talk to one of the people who raised their hand, right? So if we are thinking about connection, there is no more like, this is the most important time to really focus on it, because there are a lot of misses. I don't know if you've seen in your remote meetings often it's like, let's get right down to business. And we forget about the connection. The employee that I was talking with at Simplist, she said that it's now about depth instead of breadth. She said, when I was a manager at my old company that was an all in-person experience, she said I would check in on each of my people every day just to have touch points. But now, instead, she said, what my manager does with me is we don't meet as frequently remotely, because it's all remote, but when we do have our one-on-ones where we connect, we go deep. We really talk about how's the family, how are you, how's life, instead of just glossing over that kind of thing. So I want to share with you here the 4 leadership qualities for business recovery. And I'm going to ask for you to be vulnerable and open and honest, because that's what we do around here, right? We don't just blow smoke, and we don't do that. Like, that's for everybody else to figure out. I'm going to ask for you to figure out which of these you do best these days and which of these you do worst these days, right? So this is adding the personal. Within Lancaster Leadership, we say part of our brand is that personal development is professional development. So here you go. Welcome to the personal. So first is awareness. How aware are you? How present are you? How much are you paying attention? And it's okay if you say, I am not, because I am only putting out fires all day long. I am drowning, right? If that is your situation, it is hard to have awareness. The second is, how can you have vulnerability? Now, I want to share something that when I learned this was really revolutionary for me. This is about when vulnerability works and when it doesn't. I don't know about you, but in all of the arenas that I hear them talking about leadership and vulnerability these days, it's always like, yes, vulnerability is a great thing. But are you familiar with the pratfall effect? Anyone heard of this? Okay, so this is the thing that changed, it really opened my eyes. The pratfall effect. So pratfall essentially is a word that's just falling on your butt, right? The pratfall effect is that if I am proven and I'm trusted, and then I'm vulnerable, it really helps with my credibility. Right? If I say to all of you in Flagstaff, we've got a few trains, and I'm like, I am so sorry, everybody, that I'm late for our meeting. I got stopped by 2 trains on the way here. If I'm proven and trusted by you, you'll be like, oh, that's okay. I've had that experience too. Don't worry. However, if I'm not proven and I'm not trusted, you're going to be like, oh, yep, there she goes again, just being late. wasting all of our time. She always gets off the hook. Right? So the question really then becomes, how can I become trusted? And it doesn't mean trust is only built over time, right? That's what we call predictive trust, but trust can be built in a heartbeat, in a very short amount of time within one conversation, but it really has to do with authenticity. So that's vulnerability. Then we've got the third here, empathy, which is about sometimes we hear people say it's putting ourselves in other people's shoes, but Brene Brown talks about it as communicating that you are not alone. And then the fourth is, how can I have compassion? How can I really care? Will everybody put into the chat, which of these four do you feel like you're doing best these days? Great, keep them coming. Keep them coming. As you're figuring that out, you're then also for yourself figuring out which one you could work on the most these days. A couple other things in terms of the power of connection. In meetings, make it a priority every time. So a couple of things with that is, one, within the first 1 minute, every time, can you have some sort of connection activity to get people engaged? It might be, this is one of my favorite ones. Everybody, can you write down 2 feelings you've had this week? Put them into the chat. And then I always ask 1 or 2 people to share about their feelings, and we bring them into the fold. That's one way. Another could be within the first minute. Can everybody share in pods or with a partner what's something that's going well this week, or what's something that's been hard this week? How can you have connections every single time? Another opportunity is the use of Slack. Some of you might use Slack, some of you might use instant messaging, which that is about, that can be used as a real connection tool. Within Simplest, they have a Slack channel for people who love dogs, a Slack channel for people who love sports. And so even in the workplace, it's being encouraged while being on the clock to talk about your hobbies, your passions, right? Dogs, sports, whatever else it might be. So what are you doing to encourage people to connect even during business hours? Another thing we can do is help create a shared identity. That is, who are we and what do we stand for? The idea with Slack is also creating a shared identity. We are dog lovers, right? We are sports lovers. There was research done on all continents. So curious about Antarctica, how many people they interviewed there, in 30 countries. And what was discovered there was leaders who create shared identities lead employees who have reduced levels of burnout. Are you getting that? Whenever there's shared identity, there's less burnout, meaning that if there's that shared identity, they were safeguarded against the fallout that happened during COVID, where teams bonded or broke, they bonded. So again, if you're thinking, how do we do shared identity? Draw on the people who are really great at forging connection. Draw on the people on your team who are really good at helping a group to get clear on a vision and how to move forward together. So my question for you here, or something for you to ponder or put on your homework, is how can I put energy into our meetings times 10? Often meetings are an afterthought in terms of making them spectacular. Simplest, for one of their meetings that was across the entire corporation, brought in a magician, a remote magician. I want you to think about that, right? How can you challenge the status quo? How can you do formal and how can you do informal? We would call that one formal. And the person said it was one of the most amazing shows that I've ever seen. There's another industry that even had to pivot, right? I don't know how many virtual magic shows were done online ahead of time before COVID. And I mentioned this already. How can we have more depth instead of breadth, meaning really connecting deeply with people instead of that kind of networking idea of keeping it shallow. Here's another quote for you. This experience of talking with people about their needs, having curiosity about their career trajectory and their engagement at work, and understanding the dynamics of the team is part of the new face of the future of work. Screenshot that, write that down, right? That is the new face of work. Talking about their needs, not just what you need them to have done, right? Curiosity about their career trajectory. If you're not having career trajectory conversations, start. And understanding the engagement and the dynamics part. That is absolutely essential if you want to be effective. And then we've got one more here, and then I'm going to open it up for questions. And this is about values. What we know is that a lot of people have resigned recently. And one of the reasons, it's pretty complex, but one of the reasons people are resigning is because they think life is short. Meaning, I want to have a home and a work-life balance. I don't want to just work myself to death. I want to be a conscious employee or participator in the workforce, in the marketplace. Meaning, am I enjoying this? Am I feeling fulfilled? Is this in alignment with what I want to be doing? Another thing that I want to share is that, if your team doesn't have an espoused list of values, start there. And I don't mean your overarching organization, like I'm looking at Roxanne and thinking the city of Phoenix. That's not what we're talking about. That's very broad. But if she can go specifically to her team or her department, right? I'm looking at Hong. Are you still within the Office of Generic Drugs? I don't even know. But we're not talking that broad, but we're talking more specifically with your team. What are your team's values? Have a conversation about it. What are the values we want to espouse? And then what does that look like? How can we operationalize our values? So that's one step backwards. You got to have values to be able to say we're going to uphold them. The other thing I want to share is that when there's been research done about younger people in the workforce, right? We'll just say that if we're studying generations in the workforce, there are two reasons that they say the younger people quit. One is that, and the one that we're talking about here, is that the organization doesn't actually operate from their espoused values. So for example, if we say compassion is one of our values, it's cutthroat and everybody's competitive. If we say integrity is one of our values, but everybody's late for meetings and nobody follows up, nobody does what they say they're going to do. That's the reason, one of the top reasons young people quit. The other one is, just because you're curious of what the other one is that it's because they don't see a career trajectory. They don't see how they can keep continuing to learn and grow and develop within the organization. So the other thing I want to share that Patrick Lencioni talks about, he's the guy who's written about the 5 dysfunctions of a team. He has said that each of us in our organization, especially amongst leadership, need to be the CRO, which is the Chief Reminding Officer. And not reminding like a nag, like do your work, but chief reminding of the values. This is why we're here. This is our mission. This is what we're here to do. This is why our work is important. So he also talks about how can you be the CRO times 10. And there's a way to do it really appropriately, and that helps people to feel connected. There's a way to also do it patronizingly and where it feels really annoying, right? But it's if you are part of building an airplane and you make this particular cog, is someone sharing with you what the value is and how important it is to getting that airplane up into the air. So now the question is, so now what? What do we do now? So if you're thinking, what can I do now? And I'm going to ask you to get ready with a question. Before I share this slide with you, for those of us who have done work together before, especially in a group coaching setting, you know that I am always pushing you to get to a question. Because once you get to a question, you're that much closer to getting to an answer. As Einstein has said, if I'm given 55 minutes to solve a problem, I'll spend, if I'm given 1 hour to solve a problem, I'll spend the first 55 minutes figuring out the proper questions to ask and the last 5 minutes solving it. So I'm going to ask for you to come up with a question based on what we've been talking about here today. And once you're ready, put it into the chat. And Roxanne, I'm just seeing this now, the name of the author of which one? Tell, right in there again, because it was maybe a few minutes ago that I don't know what I was talking about. Oh, the 5 dysfunctions of a team, Patrick Lencioni. Maybe that's what you were getting at. Okay, so the now what? Here it says, for the people you work with, empower them to channel energy into reimagining the organization. Pairing vulnerability with confidence in the next normal is critical to help people transition from stages of anger or denial into working together to build a desirable future. Leaders are uniquely positioned to ignite hope and create the image of a future organization people are excited to be a part of. And that's what you want, right? You want to create an environment where people feel inspired, they're excited, they're ready for the weekend to be done so they can jump back in and be part of the mission for them to work. Just kidding. We want them to have a balanced work in life. 3 organizations that I've been working with recently, and I see some of you on this call here, is we've been doing leadership academies, and on the last day, each participant presents a work reimagined project, meaning they're taking a look at their organization or smaller, their team, and looking at what's working, what's not working, and figuring out something to suggest that could happen within their organization as being solution oriented, trying to figure out something to move forward with. Coconino County, we do that with your Leadership Academy. Lewis Mason Thurston Area Agency on Aging, we do that with your Leadership Academy. Maricopa County Department of Transportation, we do that with your Leadership Academy. But I want you to challenge yourself to go back and ask your team, how can we reimagine? How can we use this opportunity right now to figure out how to do things differently? There are so many organizations out there that will lose the opportunity of learning something from this pandemic. They're just going to keep on keeping on because they're not slowing down to think, to strategize, to figure out how they want to do something differently. And it's a shame. And I know you're here so that you can actually effectuate change, so that you can do something differently. If you can now, I'm going to ask for people to put into the chat a question that you might have come up with. I'm going to be quiet so you can actually think. It doesn't have to be a well thought out question, but you're thinking now specifically about your organization. And if you get the answer to this question, your team's going to operate better. You're going to feel more effective. Things are going to be moving in the right direction. This is your opportunity to really engage your own critical thinking and your application skills. So be quiet so you can go ahead and put a question into the chat. It doesn't mean we're going to probably answer it right now, but I want you to get to the question. You're doing great. This is the hard work. Oh, I'm so proud of you all. Turn down the volume if you're still thinking, and now I'm talking and it's not helpful. Turn down the volume so you can't hear me, but I'm going to start reading some of these out loud. We've got Maritza, how can we make sure our day-to-day work reflects and demonstrates our values? Gary, where can we improve on any level? Melissa, how can we reimagine what our work looks like? Judy, how do we serve? Oh, and Melissa, I can send you a document that I use within the leadership academies that get people to figure out that question. Just remind me at the end. Yeah. Judy, how do we serve our tourism daily with all the different personalities we face and still feel we did everything we could to assist them? Chuck, what can we do to improve our culture while honoring our mission and our guiding principles? Stephine, gosh, Stephine, I said your name wrong earlier. Oh, it's so nice to see you. How can we encourage working with integrity that reflects company values? Eva, how can we best establish an exciting, thorough, but not overwhelming onboarding experience for our incoming staff? You see the power of hearing other people's questions? You're like, oh, let me copy these questions because some of these I want us to figure out too, right? Amalia, how to make sure necessary changes are made within a reasonable time frame so employees feel heard and valued. Donnie, what can we do to engage parts of our community that feel unheard and underserved? Mike, how do we relight the fire for those that are burnt out? Oh, I want to talk with you all about each of these. Barb, how can we make sure that we are successful both working remotely and in person as a team, still contributing to our mission? Elizabeth, accountability. What's the best way to connect with emotions and evaluate based on productivity? And Molly, how can I help foster a culture of depth over breadth? Oh my gosh, do you love all the people here? Yeah, exactly, right? Eva's doing the snaps. Have we all learned to do that, like either snaps or like this silent, weird round of applause like this, right? It's good for us to have a little motion here. So what I would love to do is say, stay on with me and I will answer all of those questions for you. And that is not what you want or need. What you want or what you need is to be like, I have a great question. Let me go ask the people that I work with. I only wish that there was one PDF, a one-page PDF, that would be my preference, that had this solution to how can we be effective teams that build trust, that are engaged and motivated. Because, right, we could just be like, if I got all of those, then check, then we're done. But we are complex. And so I want you to lead with these questions. One of the things we know is one of the best ways to lead is leading with questions. You don't have to have all the answers by yourself. That is one of the things that my coach, her name is Andrea, tells me all the time. I love to collaborate with people. I just forget it's an option. I've got a problem. Let me think about it. Here's what I think I need to do. And she's like, she asks me, Julie, have you run that by anybody else? Would it be helpful for you to seek other people's ideas? I'm like, oh, I never would have thought of that again. So I encourage you to ask other people these kinds of questions. Sometimes people will say, well, I'm not very creative. I don't have great solutions. You don't need to be creative. You just need to be resourceful. So with that, I'm going to share with you what resources you might look at in terms of what helped put some of this together. But if you're wanting to move the needle forward on anything, all you need to do is start perhaps by asking a colleague or Googling, right? Just by saying, how can we operationalize our values? Maritza Brene Brown has some great stuff on her, or what can it look like in our daily actions? She has some great stuff on her website. So now, as I've got you for 4 more minutes, and thank you so much for spending your time with us and with me. I know time is absolutely precious, and so I'm so delighted that you're here. I want to ask you, You know, it's always good for us to synthesize after an experience to get the most. Will you share, will you put into the chat, what's your biggest takeaway from today? What are you going to implement? Meaning either what's a takeaway or what's an action you're going to do based on this conversation today. And I realize it's not too much of a conversation. I've done a lot of talking, but with a short amount of time, I want to give you all the information that I can. Go ahead and put them in there. And just so you know, this will come out as a recording afterwards for all of you who are here today. Ah, yes, yes, yes. Great. The chief reminding officer, infusing opportunity to connect. It's okay to share feelings at work. Work to change the way I communicate so it's easier to absorb for people in a crisis. Don't you love seeing the takeaways, right? They're so varied. Keep them coming. Keep them coming. How to enlist more resources to help me through the hard stuff. Yeah, keep them coming. Don't give up. Keep putting your takeaways in there. I also want you to be thinking about what's your biggest struggle as a leader. That might be really in connection to what you've just written about as a takeaway, right? What's my biggest struggle? Once you identify it, just like with that Einstein quote, you can start to realize there are ways through it. There is always hope, and there's always something that can be done. The other thing I want to ask you, and this is for you to really reflect on, are you getting the right amount of leadership support and development to grow and improve? Right now in your life, are you? And if your answer is no, I'm going to share with you an opportunity, or even if you're like, yes, but I always want more. I want to share with you this group coaching intensive that we have coming up. We open these up twice per year, and it is for a group of divergent leaders, meaning they're not all from your organization, who get together for a 5-month program. Here's a quote from somebody: what you get is connection with dynamic leaders from other walks of life. Secondly, the opportunity to reflect, because it's on your calendar and so it's going to happen, and a future focused strategy, meaning together we're focusing on specific topics so you can feel not alone and you can strategize forward. And it's also about developing your leadership skills and becoming more effective, because even though you are creative, resourceful, and whole as you are also looking to develop yourselves. In the fall, we have an August start. The topics are succession planning. I'm curious if any of these, which of these are the most interesting to you? They are being a coach to your team and teaching others to coach. They are, the third one is creating a culture of trust and high morale. And the next one is exemplary customer service and emotional intelligence. And the last one, meeting effectiveness. So if you are interested in learning more about it, you can go to this website, and there's pricing, and there's dates, and there's a list of all the past graduates, and there's lots of information there. I have to share with you, it's honestly my very favorite program to put out there because it's intimate. It's done remotely. It's done in 2-hour blocks, so it's manageable. And the connection that happens with people gain friendships for life, and they get to share their challenges together, and they get to overcome them together. So I wanted to share that with you. And with that, feel free to connect with me on social media. If you haven't already, we've got a lot of people having good conversation out there, especially that Facebook. We've got a Facebook group called Lifelong Leaders. And so I encourage you to join in there. It is 1:15 on the dot. So I would love to wrap it up there. Thank you all so much for your time and participation. Great. Thank you so much. Anybody, please feel free. I see a couple of notes coming into the chat saying that you'd like to talk about that group coaching intensive. Wonderful. We can either email or we can talk about it as soon as we hang up here. And thank you all for putting in your takeaways. I'm so grateful for you. I'm so proud of you for fighting the good fight. Whenever you are ready, if you wouldn't mind, would you mind unmuting, saying your goodbyes? Whenever you're ready, go ahead and hang up, and feel free to stay back with me for a few minutes. if you'd like to talk about anything. Thanks, everybody.
Bye.
Bye. Bye. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye, Julie.
Thanks, Julie.
Take care.
Thank you.
Thank you, Julie.
Thank you so much.